Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes? Matt here from YoVideogames, and I'm back again to talk about the Sony Direct, or as they called it, the Sony State of Play. I've had a little bit of chance to digest, I've let it go a couple days, and really, I don't really think much changed from my initial reaction, which was just sort of like laughter at the irony or the sort of patheticness of it all. And yeah, I think the ratio bar on Sony's own official video kind of says it all. Yeah, this was not exactly the most fan favorite way of communicating their upcoming slate of things. And really, to take a step back here and talk about, okay, what's going on here? Like, what is happening here? And basically, and I think the whole justification of all of this is that I think, in my mind, is that Sony's on autopilot right now, and they're on autopilot because they can be, because they're super successful, and there's not a lot of need or reason for them to be anything else. I mean, sure, it makes the brand look bad, it kind of doesn't install any sort of goodwill, but they're also like not in any position where they're hurting necessarily. So before this direct, we kind of had just a series of cancellations and non-commitments from Sony. They backed out of E3 this year. They had no PSX last year. They had a kind of disappointing E3 going all the way back to last June. And then before that, a lot of people were criticizing them beforehand, where the PSX previously in 2017 was super underwhelming. And then they had Paris Games Week, which was also kind of meh. And the E3 before that in 2017 was also sort of underwhelming. So Sony's not really had a really big standout moment in a while now. Now, that's not to say they haven't had big releases. They obviously had, Dad of Boy and, Spider-Man last year, which were fantastic games. They were totally worth the praise and acclaim they got. They were great fucking games. And that's fine, but as far as looking ahead, Sony, I feel, probably also feels the same way, that we can only talk about Death Stranding, Last of Us 2, and even Ghost of Tsushima, less so that one. But we can only talk about these other games so long. And one of them was in the Direct, of course, which is Days Gone. And I feel like they're probably like, we can only keep hyping them up and keep having these big presentations forever before people get bored and fatigued of hearing about these titles. And on the one hand, it's like, yeah, I kind of feel like that's the same way. Like, you only keep trying this out so much. But on the other, I feel like, man, you really should have dragged one of those out for your state of play. So this is actually the first time Sony's had anything like close to a press conference or what have you in a long, long time, since basically June of last year. So that is a very long time to go without any sort of major announcements or anything. And they decided that they were going to, in the grand Sony tradition of just copying everything Nintendo does wholesale, they decided they were going to make a Sony Direct, call it State of Play. Even the way the thing was presented with the narrator and the slides, it's like a complete Xerox of what Nintendo does. They weren't satisfied with copying the analog stick. They weren't satisfied with copying Rumble Pack. They weren't satisfied with copying motion controls. They had to find something else to copy Nintendo, and now it's their digital presentation. So, yeah, we'll probably, I imagine, getting closer to E3, probably in early June, going forward, we might get another Sony State of Play, possibly. Let's just hope it's better than what we got here. So all that out of the way, how did this actual State of Play happen? Even though we clearly established Sony's not had a great run of presentations leading up to this, and yeah, this was no different. But how was this one specifically? And yeah, not good. It might. I don't even know. You could say, hey, it's great if you're a PlayStation VR fan, but I don't really even think that's true, because I don't feel like we got anything major announced for PlayStation VR. Now here's the kind of the problem with PlayStation VR, and it's kind of the issue I sort of kept fearing, I kept talking about. And yes, I absolutely got some shit for saying, but it's kind of come true, and that is, yes, RE7 was fucking great for PlayStation VR, but is momentum going to be kept? Are we going to keep seeing games of RE7's caliber after RE7, or is that going to kind of be it, and then no one's going to be taking a chance and funding and budgeting big games to work in VR after that. And yeah, that was my fear. I was completely justified in that, because here we are years later, and really nothing else has come forward of anywhere close to Resident Evil 7's level of VR experience or caliber. They started opening up with Iron Man VR, which is something that we'll see through a lot of this. Seems like something that kind of should have shown up years ago. It reminds me, obviously, it's probably a more fleshed out version of the little teaser demo they had for Spider-Man Homecoming in VR. It's neat, but it's like, I don't think it's going to sell anyone on VR. Whatever. And then they started with, a little update on Crash Team Racing, and, it looks nice, looks really good. I don't know. I mean, it's a good thing to be in there, but it's kind of something everyone was kind of expecting already. We then got to look at another free update to No Man's Sky. It's obviously going to include VR, of course, because that's the theme of the show. This might be something that gets a little closer to what I was talking about with Resident Evil, where I'm like, hey, when are we going to get like a big, full-fledged gaming experience? Because a lot of VR games, even if they're good, they're all sort of like bite-sized experiences. No Man's Sky getting a VR update, that might edge closer to what, I'm talking about with like a full VR experience, like a full game. That's if anyone cares at this point. But, it had a little bit of a resurgence where, they went back and decided, well, shit, we've been lying to people since literally the day before the release of the game. Let's go back and, like, fulfill our promises. And that's what they've been doing. So, I mean, good on them for fulfilling your promises, but I don't know what, that's a whole nother set of arguments there. But anyways, one of the few non-VR games they talked about after that was Ready, Set, Heroes, which to me just looks like, well, someone's trying to fill the hole of Skylanders without the toys, whatever. I guess one of the more interesting things announced right after that was the release date of Blood and Truth, which was Sony London Studios. Basically it looked kind of like a getaway VR experience. And it's coming out in May. I remember seeing the game, and I don't even remember when. It was how far back it was. But yeah, this game was shown and announced a long time ago, and then just kind of went radio silence. And hey, it's coming out in May. But it's hard to tell from the trailer because it's very, slick and cinematic. But I don't know how much of an actual full-fledged game it is. There was that sort of London Heist or whatever VR demo on PlayStation VR Worlds, and it was neat. But and to me, this just feels like the full realization of that. It'd be cool if it was like, a full-ass game and not just sort of like a series of cinematic levels, but it's really hard to tell from what we saw. Then we just got a huge montage of other VR titles. Again, this is VR. It's kind of like when Xbox One was first announced and it was all TV, sports. And here it's VR. And then they showed kind of an interesting game after the VR montage called Observation, where you basically play HAL from 2001 on a space station. It could be neat, but it's not something that I'm like dying to play or jump into. Of course, after that was Five Nights VR, everyone's favorite thing. It's weird how much, even when I was live streaming this, how much within my own chat people were really just upset at the fact that, oh god, more Five Nights. Oh, Five Nights VR. It's like, well, it's popular. Kids love it. I mean, again, this goes back to Iron Man VR, where I'm like, this seems like something that should have showed up 2 years ago, not now. But whatever. Am I gonna play it? Fuck no. But it makes sense why they're doing it. For me, the next game was like the only kind of slight interesting announcement, and it wasn't really an announcement because I think I saw this game before somewhere at E3 or something. That was Concrete Genie. I don't know anything about the developer Pixel Opus, but the idea was kind of neat, where it's sort of like this interesting, I don't know what you would call it. It's definitely like third-person sort of adventure game. You draw stuff on the walls, and you sort of like, it seems like it's cool because you have like these little graffiti creatures that you use to interact with the environment by drawing stuff for them to move across these walls of the city. And the whole point is to like, draw all over all the walls of the city so that all these painted creatures have like a world to inhabit or something. I don't know. It looked kind of neat. I like some of the maybe possible puzzle implementation from it. Of course, it's going to have a VR mode, but when they say VR mode, that means, yeah, it's like something like Tekken or something, where it's like, it's not the whole game, it's just, there's a mode. But it was kind of the only slightly interesting thing I felt that we got out of the whole VR experience. And then last was like a big, another cinematic look at Days Gone. I predicted this. Game's coming out next month. Obviously, they got to kind of like talk it, hype it up. Like, the only thing is, I was never really that thrilled for Days Gone anyways, and at this point, I'm just like, just release the damn thing. It might be a really good game. It might be a really solid game. We could be looking at this year's God of War. Okay, maybe not that crazy, but I mean, it could be a really, like, honest to God, solid, awesome game. It's just, at this point, it's like, I'm done talking about it, I'm done looking at it, just fucking release it so we can play it. And they ended it on kind of a high note, and that was the Mortal Kombat 11 trailer. That's what everyone was kind of talking about. Yo, but that MK trailer, though, I'm like, yes, that was a great MK trailer, but I didn't need to suffer through a giant fucking commercial for PlayStation VR to get to one cool Mortal Kombat 11 trailer. And yes, it was a cool trailer. It had, I guess the point of it was to show, hey, Liu Kang, Kung Lao, and Jax are playable. We kind of already knew Liu Kang and Kung Lao from the reveal event, but it's still cool to see more of them. Saw like Kung Lao's one of his finishers, fatalities. So that was neat. I like Kung Lao. He's always been sort of a personal favorite character of mine in Mortal Kombat. So I'm happy that we got at least a nice, cool trailer for that at the end of all of this. So, I mean, I don't really need to talk about the trailer. Max kind of already had his reaction video and all that, and it's awesome. It's a great trailer. I kind of just wish we just had. I just kind of wish the MK trailer was just released and that was fucking it. I would have been fine with that. But yeah, this was a growing pains, a learning curve for Sony. As far as the actual presentation, it was done well. It showed up on time. It was the actual, the production of it was fine. It's just that they didn't really have anything to show. I'm really shocked they didn't put a release date for one of their big three games. Like, I'd heard rumors that Last of Us 2 was going to be their big fall game this year, and I was kind of debating if it was going to be that or Ghost of Tsushima. I'm like, it's going to be one of the two. It's probably going to be Ghost, but then I'm hearing it's Last of Us 2, and we didn't get any of that. We didn't get a release date for any of that, and that to me was kind of like, woof, really? Like, it didn't have to be a giant trailer. We didn't have to watch some innocent person getting, like, mauled and beaten and bludgeoned to death in a forest. We just, just a quick little montage of gameplay, which I know would be sacrilegious to Naughty Dog at this point, but just a quick montage of gameplay and just a general release date of fall or October, November, whatever. It would have been fine. It would have got people talking. It's kind of what Sony hasn't learned from Nintendo's Directs, which is even like bad Nintendo Directs always tend to have little nuggets. Nintendo's really good about, they open with something that people definitely want to see or talk about. Could be a Smash character. It could be Mario Maker 2, which they opened their last Direct with. It could be, something like that. Like something good, something pretty good that they open with, and then they end with something that's going to get people really talking, right? And that's how they've kind of like learned to do this. And Sony just didn't know what to do. They opened up with Iron Man VR, which is like, I guess maybe, but it's like there's been plenty of times it's just the name Iron Man is not like a free pass to say, this is an amazing gaming experience. People are going to be really into it. But whatever. And then ending on MK11 is like, okay, yes, that is a very big third-party game that's coming out in a month that everyone's going to get. Like, for Sony, I don't know what ending on Mortal Kombat 11 necessarily does for Sony. So, yeah. Like, now to reverse this back, like, let's look at, like, Nintendo had a Direct last month. They opened with Mario Maker 2. They ended with fucking Link's Awakening remake. Like, those two things alone get people talking, and then previous Nintendo Directs do things like that, too, where, like, they'll open with Luigi's Mansion 3, and then they'll end with, like, something else, like a Smash announcement or something like that. Like, this is how you do it, This is what you do. But, yeah, Sony's obviously going to have to learn a little bit the hard way of, like, how you properly open and close these things. So, there's that. As far as like, you know, going forward, I mean, obviously they said there'll be more to come. I think this was sort of just to get the VR stuff out. Like that's kind of another thing I feel was that this state of play was done because they had some VR announcements and they had no good way of delivering it. And they knew that if they just quietly released VR trailers to their YouTube channel, it kind of would have been buried. So they kind of drummed up a little bit of like hype by saying they're doing like a Sony Direct. Got people excited. I mean, I beforehand people were saying we're going to see an update on Final Fantasy VII Remake here, and I was like, oh fuck no, and of course not. So yeah, this was kind of not the greatest of idea, and VR is fine. I guess they got to still keep showing it, but the adoption rate for VR, I think they announced that there's about 4.7 million PlayStation VR sold, and there's over 91 million PS4s. Probably close to 100 million at this point, and that's just the reality is that the adoption rate of PlayStation VR right now is about 5%, which it's basically a Sega CD. And that's, again, why we're not seeing Resident Evil 7-like experiences on PlayStation VR. We're not seeing massive, you know, AAA video game experience, even from Sony. Sony's not even dipped their toe in anything major. You know, Astrobot's like probably their best game they've released for it, and it's, you know, it's a fun, simple, well done platformer, but it's not something that Sony spent God of War money on. And the reason for that is very simple. You have a 5% adoption rate, so it's this is where like the sort of issue comes from, is that you have a system that they've had and they've kind of been like trying to drum up support for, but they know that at the end of the day the 4.7 user base is still kind of small. Actually, it's abysmal. You know, it's basically a third of what the Wii U sold. So, woof. That's why you're just not seeing that. And yeah, that's kind of why people are upset. Like they tried to drum up a whole Sony Direct on a platform that's kind of low adoption rate right now. So, I hope to see it get better in the future, but again, arrogant Sony is here, and arrogant Sony's a whole thing I could make a video on. Let me know if you guys would like me to do that. I wouldn't, not like necessarily a giant screaming rant, but if you'd like to hear me talk more about arrogant Sony and why that's bad for the game industry as a whole, go ahead and let me know. But as far as the state of play goes, it's kind of like state of meh at this point, but that's what I gotta say on this. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you on the channel. Later, dudes.